The crowd outside the opulent press conference hall is a chaotic sea of flashing cameras and buzzing whispers. Reporters jostle for position, some with microphones in hand, others holding up their smartphones to capture every moment. The tension is palpable, the air thick with anticipation. Inside the grand hall, the lights shine harshly, illuminating the polished marble floors and gleaming chandeliers. At the front of the room, the celebrity matriarch, dressed in a sleek, black designer dress, stands behind the podium. Her face is an immaculate mask of composure, though anyone watching closely can see the subtle twitch in her hand as she adjusts the microphone. The whispers outside swell into a crescendo as she opens her mouth to speak, and then, in an instant, the room goes deathly silent. The heavy weight of the moment is undeniable. "Ladies and gentlemen," she begins, her voice smooth yet firm, "I stand before you today under unfortunate circumstances." Her eyes sweep over the sea of reporters, but it's as if she's looking through them. She knows this is the moment that will define her, her family, her brand. The press conference had been called to address a slew of accusations, but none were as damaging as the one she is about to confront. A whisper floats from the back of the room, barely audible over the camera's clicks. They got the proof. She pauses for effect, the room waiting for her next words, like an animal stalking its prey. Then her eyes narrow ever so slightly. She doesn't flinch when she hears the first gasp from the crowd. She simply exhales calmly, as if everything was still under control. "The claims of fraud against my family and our brand," she continues, her voice steady, "are baseless and defamatory. We will fight this. We will expose the truth." But just as she finishes, a sharp voice cuts through the silence. "Your company has been under investigation for months, Ms. Sinclair," a reporter calls out from the front row, his voice dripping with skepticism. "And now we've learned that you and your son are implicated in some very shady deals. How do you respond to that?" The matriarch's jaw tightens, but she doesn't let the question rattle her. She leans in slightly, meeting the reporter's gaze. "Shady deals? You must be mistaken," she says, her words biting. "Those claims are false. This is nothing more than an attempt to destroy my family's legacy." The room waits for the next exchange, but before another word can be spoken, the doors to the hall burst open. An unseen figure steps into the doorway, shrouded in shadow. The flash of a camera catches the figure's silhouette just as the room's energy shifts. The figure enters, tall, dark-suited, and smug. It's a rival businessman, once a friend, but now a formidable enemy. The cameras zoom in on his face, capturing every inch of his smirk. The matriarch stiffens, her eyes flashing with a mixture of fury and disbelief. She knew this man, once considered a trusted ally in the industry, but now he stands in front of her like a predator circling his prey. "Let's not pretend this isn't over, Emily," he says, his voice slick with arrogance. "I've got everything I need. Your time is up." A murmur spreads through the crowd. Her name, Emily Sinclair, is now linked with scandal. The cameras turn to her in a frenzy, as if waiting for her to crumble. She stands there, the weight of the world pressing down on her, and yet she refuses to let them see her sweat. For a moment, it feels as though the room itself is holding its breath. Then, without a word, she looks up at the screens, showing her family's photo, the smile on her face, the one they had all worked so hard to build, now a distant memory. But there is something in her gaze. It's not fear, it's cold resolve. She will not lose, not today. As the reporter's question hangs in the air, the camera flashes continue to burn into her. She takes a deep breath and speaks again, her voice louder, more commanding than before. I have no intention of losing, Mr. Daniels. You may have your moment now, but mark my words, this will be far from over. And just like that, she turns and strides confidently off the stage. The cameras keep flashing, but it's unclear whether they're catching her downfall or her resolve to fight back. The final shot freezes on her exit, a glimpse of the glimmering hope still in her eyes. Suspense lingers in the air as the crowd falls into stunned silence, everyone wondering what will come next. The matriarch, Emily Sinclair, had just stepped off the stage, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she moved quickly toward her entourage. The weight of the press conference still hung in the air, but she felt her resolve strengthening. She had made it clear to the press they had underestimated her, and she would fight back. But just as she reached the door, a sharp voice cut through the murmur of reporters still huddling around the press podium. Ms. Sinclair, I'm afraid you're going to want to hear this. Emily froze mid-step. The voice belonged to none other than Simon Daniels, the rival business magnate she had once called a colleague, a man now trying to tear her family apart. The tall figure approached slowly, his perfectly tailored suit reflecting the sharpness of his grin. A stack of documents, unmistakably official, was in his hand. The cameras, still rolling, swiveled toward him. The murmurs in the room grew louder. It was impossible to ignore the dramatic entrance of the man who had been circling the family's empire, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Excuse me, Mr. Daniels, I believe you're interrupting. Emily's voice was steady, but her pulse quickened. She instinctively stepped back, aware of how exposed she was in this moment. The reporter's eyes were trained on her, waiting for a reaction. Simon's smile never faltered as he stepped forward, holding up the legal papers for all to see. I believe it's you who needs to pay attention now, Emily. His voice was cool, composed. The good people of the media should be the first to know about the lawsuit I'm filing against your family. The room fell silent, the reporters all leaning in, their cameras capturing every word. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, but she managed to keep her expression neutral. The media had already painted her as the villain. This new move could turn the tide completely. What's this now, Simon? She asked, her voice more controlled than she felt. Her mind raced, calculating how to handle this new assault. He waved the papers with exaggerated flair. Oh, it's nothing too serious. Just a little claim about unfair practices, perhaps some false advertising and shady dealings surrounding the multi-million-dollar merger you've been bragging about. You know, the one that's made you all so rich and untouchable. Well, it turns out there's more to it than meets the eye. Her jaw tightened. She could feel the heat of the cameras on her now, the pressure mounting. She had spent years building her family's empire, carefully crafted deals, painstakingly constructed brand partnerships, and an image that had been near perfect. And now this man, this opportunistic businessman, was trying to bring it all crashing down with a single swipe. Simon, this is nothing but a smear campaign. You and I both know it, she shot back, keeping her composure. But even as the words left her mouth, she realized that they wouldn't hold the same weight in the court of public opinion. This wasn't just about a corporate rivalry anymore. This was about a fight for survival. The media buzz around her intensified, voices rising in a frenzy. Whispers of her family's impending downfall spread like wildfire. The papers would be filled with headlines the next day. Sinclair family under fire, lawsuit could bring empire to its knees. Simon took a deliberate step closer to her, his smirk widening. You see, Emily, I didn't want to do this, but when you play with people's lives, you've got to expect consequences. Your family might have the public's trust now, but that's all about to change. He turned, taking a step toward the cameras. I'm confident that the truth will come out in the end, and it won't be pretty for the Sinclairs. The camera flashes exploded in rapid succession, capturing every move, every word. The media pounced on the opportunity, interviewing shocked reporters and firing questions in all directions. But Emily remained unmoved. Her mind was racing, calculating her next steps, the damage already done to her reputation. As the news outlets picked up the lawsuit, her name was now synonymous with the scandal. Emily knew she couldn't let this moment define her, but how could she fight back when the odds seemed so stacked against her? She was still surrounded by the press when her lawyer, looking flustered, hurried to her side. We need to act fast. Emily, he whispered urgently, his eyes darting around. This could cost us everything. She nodded, her eyes narrowing. Not everything. Not yet. Her gaze shifted back to Simon, who was now surrounded by his own circle of reporters, enjoying the chaos he'd just unleashed. There was no turning back now. This was war. But just as the media frenzy reached a fever pitch, Emily's voice broke through the noise, cold and cutting. I'm not done yet, Simon, she called across the room. Her words weren't for him. They were for everyone watching, waiting for her to crumble. This is just the beginning. The room fell into stunned silence. She didn't flinch, even as the cameras zoomed in on her. She would not let them see her break. The suspense was palpable, the stakes higher than ever before. The soft hum of the mansion's grand clock filled the tense silence as Emily Sinclair paced back and forth in her private study. The expensive Persian rugs beneath her feet felt out of place, too pristine for the storm that was about to hit. She had just received the news. A journalist with a notorious reputation for digging up scandals had leaked private communications between her and several high-profile investors. The emails, now circulating on social media, were filled with discussions about inflating the valuation of her family's brand. Words like manipulate, inflate, and undisclosed payments danced across the screen in the text exchanges, each one a nail in the coffin of her carefully cultivated public image. The phone on her desk buzzed relentlessly. First, it was her lawyer asking to schedule an emergency meeting. Then, it was her publicist urging her to prepare for a media onslaught. Emily glanced at the incoming calls and let them ring out. She couldn't bear to answer just yet, not when the world was watching her every move. The first notification came through, a tweet from the journalist. The headline read, "Exclusive, Sinclair family, accused of using deceptive practices to inflate brand value." The media mogul had gotten hold of private conversations and was now twisting the narrative for maximum damage. Emily's hands trembled as she clicked through to the news article. As the details unfolded, her breath caught in her throat. There, it was proof, at least in the public's eye, that she had knowingly manipulated financial reports and hidden key information from investors to inflate the value of Good American Family, their flagship brand. It was a devastating blow. Outside the study, the sounds of reporters shouting at the front gates filtered in. The mansion was being swarmed, the press conference from days before now looking like a mere prelude to this carnage. Emily could hear the distinct pop of camera flashes through the windows, the sound of her once solid fortress crumbling under the pressure. A knock on the door broke her reverie. Her assistant stepped inside, her face pale, holding up her phone. "Emily, the story's going viral. It's trending worldwide. I'm sorry, but the press, they're already on their way." Emily's jaw clenched. She felt the weight of every second crashing down on her. The world was turning on her. The family's empire, built over decades of meticulous work, was now at risk of being reduced to nothing more than scandal and fraud. "Is there anything we can do?" her assistant asked, her voice wavering.
"Nothing we can do but face them," Emily replied through gritted teeth. "Call my lawyer again. I need to make sure we're ready to fight back." As the assistant hurried off, Emily stood motionless for a long moment, her thoughts swirling. The beaker of emails, those damn emails, had exposed too much, too many secrets, too many backdoor deals.
The careful facade she had built around her family was crumbling. In the distance, her family's portraits hung on the walls of the study, a reminder of everything that was at stake. She walked over to one of the photos, her fingers brushing the glass frame. Her children, once so proud of their legacy, now had their futures tied to her every decision. She had always been the rock, the one who could weather any storm. But this was different. This storm had teeth, and it was coming for her. Her phone buzzed again, another press release, this time from an old ally in the industry, announcing that they were severing ties with Good American Family. Emily's heart sank. One by one, the business partners, the celebrities who once supported her, began to distance themselves. Outside, the cameras were relentless. The flashing lights from the front gates seeped through the curtains, painting the room in erratic, harsh bursts of
light.
Emily took a long, steadying breath, trying to regain control, but the words kept echoing in her mind. Inflated brand, illegal practices. Her family had always been above reproach, always the picture of perfection. But now the public would see them for what they truly were, at least according to the media. It didn't matter that the accusations were fabricated. No one would believe her. The TV in the corner flickered on. A news anchor's voice filled the room, repeating the details of the leak. Shocking new revelations today, as emails between Emily Sinclair and investors suggest deliberate manipulation of Good American Family's financial reports. The brand's valuation, which was once hailed as a global success story, is now under scrutiny. With this bombshell, the Sinclair family could be facing massive financial and legal repercussions. Emily turned her back on the television, unable to watch any longer. She paced once again, her mind racing. There had to be a way out of this. There had to be a way to clear her name. But as the minutes ticked by, it became clear this wasn't just about cleaning up the family's reputation. This was about survival. Her brand, her legacy, her entire family's future. Everything was hanging by a thread. Her phone rang once again, and this time she answered it. Her lawyer's voice was strained, urgent. "Emily, we need to move fast. We're talking about potential criminal charges here." "I know," she replied, her voice low. "I'm not going to let them win. Not now. Not ever." She hung up the phone with a sharp click, and for the first time since the leak, Emily allowed herself a moment of clarity. She knew that her fight for redemption was only beginning, and it would take everything she had to reclaim her family's honor and their future. But with each passing minute, the stakes grew higher and the clock was ticking faster. The battle for her family's survival was on. The press conference was over, but the damage was just beginning. Emily Sinclair could feel it in her bones, the rising tide of media attacks, the growing whispers behind closed doors. As she stood by the large windows of her mansion, staring out into the sprawling gardens, the weight of the world pressed down on her. It wasn't just the legal battle anymore. It was about the survival of everything she had worked for, the family name, their legacy, their brand. But then the phone rang. Her assistant's voice trembled through the line. "Emily, Simon Daniels is speaking at a press event right now."
He's calling you out by name. He's using the media to turn the tide in his favor. You need to see this.
Emily's fingers gripped the edge of the marble counter as she made her way to the living room, where the television was already tuned in to the news. Simon Daniels, the ruthless billionaire and former business partner, stood on stage, his broad frame filling the screen. Behind him, a sea of reporters captured every word, every gesture, as he exuded power and control. He smirked confidently, almost smug, his voice cool, as he spoke into the microphone. It's truly a shame when people's greed blinds them to the truth. The Sinclair family has built an empire, yes, but on the backs of lies, deception, and manipulation. We've now seen the emails, the texts, proof that they've been inflating their brand's worth, deceiving investors, and, frankly, defrauding their way to the top. Emily's grip tightened on the arm of the chair. She had seen enough of Simon Daniels to know that this was no ordinary business rivalry, this was personal. He had always been a man of few scruples, a calculated tycoon who saw everyone as either a threat or a stepping stone. The fact that he had turned against her family felt like a betrayal that cut to the bone. Simon continued, leaning forward into the mic, his gaze piercing and unrelenting. "We all know the truth now. The Sinclair's reputation is built on sand, and it's only a matter of time before it all comes crashing down. I've made it clear to my partners, to my clients, and to my retailers, we will not tolerate being associated with a family that operates in this manner. And if they are to remain in business, they must answer for their actions." Emily's breath caught. She could feel the pressure mounting as Simon's words echoed through the media. It wasn't just an accusation, it was a targeted campaign. He was using his influence not only in the press but across the business world to isolate her family and drive the final stake into their empire. His words dripped with a calculated malice that stung, each phrase designed to chip away at her family's trustworthiness. "And let's not forget," Simon added, raising an eyebrow with an air of superiority, "the power I have in the political world. I've been a major donor to several key figures and they're already asking questions. The Sinclairs will face not just a lawsuit, but public scrutiny on all levels. It's time for the truth to be told, and the truth is that they are not fit to continue their charade." The reporters erupted into a flurry of questions, but Simon turned his back to them, a signal that he had made his point. The camera zoomed in on his smug face as he stepped off the stage, already seeing the fallout of his words spread across the media like wildfire. Emily felt her pulse race. This was no longer just a legal battle, it was a full-blown media war. Simon Daniels, with his media and political connections, was using everything at his disposal to tear her down, and it seemed as though nothing would stop him. The weight of it all pressed on her chest as she watched the headlines flash across the screen. Daniels' attack on Sinclair family escalates. Retailers and sponsors cut ties with good American family amid scandal. The buzz was deafening, and for the first time, Emily wondered if this time the family might not be able to recover. But as the news continued to unfold, a fierce determination set in. She wasn't going to let Simon Daniels win. Not like this.
Not after everything they had fought for. She turned away from the screen, her eyes narrowing with resolve. "Get my team on the phone," she said to her assistant, her voice low but steady. "We need to fight back. I'm not going to let him destroy
Everything we've built, not without a fight." Her mind was already racing, formulating a plan. She knew that Simon's public onslaught was just the beginning, but she had her own weapons to wield. She had access to powerful allies, legal experts, and media connections of her own, and she wasn't about to let this man, who hid behind his wealth and influence, take everything from her. She paced the room, her fingers tapping against her chin as the reality of the battle set in. It wasn't just about proving her innocence anymore, it was about taking control of the narrative, showing the world that she wouldn't be bullied, that she wouldn't be the one to back down. Emily Sinclair was no stranger to power struggles. She had built her empire from the ground up, and Simon Daniels was just another adversary. But now, with everything at stake, it was time to fight back, harder, smarter, and more decisively than ever before. And as Simon basked in his public victory, Emily prepared for her own counterattack, one that would turn the tables and show the world who the real power player was. The studio lights blazed above Emily Sinclair, harsh and unforgiving, as she sat on the plush, overstuffed chair beside the host, Sarah Montgomery. The set, decorated with sleek modern furnishings and polished chrome, contrasted starkly with the storm inside Emily's chest. She had prepared herself for this moment. This was her chance to speak directly to the public, to take control of the narrative, the audience murmured in the background, waiting for Sarah to make the first move. Emily straightened her back, her fingers gripping the edge of the chair, her perfectly manicured hands betraying the tension in her body. She had been in control of her image for years, carefully crafted, flawless. But now it felt as though the world was watching a woman unravel. "Emily Sinclair, thank you so much for joining us today." Sarah's voice cut through the air, smooth and poised, but there was an edge to it that Emily couldn't ignore. "This has certainly been a difficult time for you and your family, and we know the public has been dying to hear your side of the story. Let's start with the basics. How do you respond to the accusations of financial fraud and deception?" Emily smiled, but it was tight, forced. The cameras zoomed in on her face, capturing every twitch of her expression. Her PR team had prepped her for this. She was calm, composed. She had to be. "Thank you for having me, Sarah," she began, her voice controlled, but with a hint of rawness underneath. "I want to be very clear about this. I've worked my entire life to build something
I'm proud of.
The accusations against me and my family are not just baseless, they're defamatory, and I will fight to prove that." The audience shifted, some nodding, some skeptical, and the tension began to thicken. Sarah leaned forward, her pen poised, a glimmer of amusement in her eyes. "But Emily, these accusations aren't just rumors. The public has seen the leaked emails, communications between you and investors that suggest you deliberately inflated the value of your brand. How do you explain that?" Emily's stomach churned. She knew this was coming. This was the part where they'd poke at the raw nerves, where her every word would be dissected. "Those emails—" Emily's voice wavered for the briefest moment, but she quickly steadied herself. "They were taken out of context, misleading and, frankly, fabricated to look like something they're not. There was never any ill intent. Everything we did was above board." The sharp glint in Sarah's eyes didn't fade. "But Emily, surely you can see how that could look suspicious to the public. You're a public figure, and people trust you, trust your brand. Do you believe it's possible that some of those decisions, those deals may have been questionable?" There it was, the bait. Sarah's voice dripped with calculated sweetness, her smile a little too wide. Emily clenched her fists at her sides but kept her face impassive. "I understand why people might have questions," Emily said, taking a breath. But I will not let the media distort the truth. What we have here is an attack, a personal vendetta driven by someone who has nothing but malice for my family. Sarah didn't let up. I'm sure you're aware, Emily, that your past is being scrutinized as well. There are reports of relationships.
You've had in the business world some not so favorable. Can you speak to that? The room seemed to shrink around Emily. The questions were coming faster now, and with each one, her composure faltered just a bit more.
She could feel the weight of every past mistake, every misstep, being dragged into the open. Everyone has a past, Sarah, Emily responded, her voice steady but laced with a hint of defensiveness. What matters is the work we've done since then. I'm here today because of my dedication to my family, to my company, and to the people who have supported me. I will not let those past mistakes define me now. But Sarah wasn't finished. But it's hard to ignore the allegations of a cover-up, Emily. We've seen whispers of secret financial deals, tax evasion, and even the questionable involvement of certain high-profile individuals. Do you deny any of this? The words hit like a punch to the gut. Emily's hand trembled, and for a fraction of a second, her mask slipped. Her jaw tightened, her eyes flashing with a mixture of fury and fear. This was no longer about a legal fight. This was about her entire life being
laid bare for the world to see. Those claims are completely false, she shot back, her voice low but forceful. There's nothing to hide. But even as she said the words, a knot of doubt formed in the pit of her stomach. Were there things that couldn't be explained away?
So easily? Sarah's voice softened, but there was no mistaking the sharpness beneath her tone. You know, Emily, the public tends to forgive people who show vulnerability. It's the secrets we hide that make us seem less trustworthy. Are you willing to admit that there might have been mistakes made, that there might have been things done that? Before Sarah could finish, Emily stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. The cameras clicked in rapid succession, capturing the moment as Emily's expression hardened, her eyes wild with emotion.
I will not sit here and let you tear me down with lies, she snapped, her voice cutting through the studio. I've spent my life building a legacy, and I will not let anyone destroy it. Not now, not ever. The audience fell into stunned silence.
The host, clearly taken aback, stared at Emily, momentarily speechless. The tension in the room was palpable, the cameras capturing every second of the unraveling moment. Emily turned and stormed off the set, her heels clicking furiously against the floor. As she exited, her mind raced. This was no longer a battle for public opinion. It was a battle for her dignity. The media coverage exploded in the aftermath, with some sympathetic to Emily's emotional outburst, but others quick to label her as defensive and guilty. The battle for sympathy had only just begun, and Emily knew she had to fight harder than ever before. The grand dining room was eerily quiet as the family gathered around the long, polished oak table. The towering windows looked out into the expansive gardens, but the view felt distant, cold, nothing like the warmth the family once shared. Emily Sinclair sat at the head of the table, her eyes tired but determined, her hands folded tightly in front of her. Her children, all grown now, sat around her, their faces a mixture of anxiety and guilt. The air was thick with unspoken words. A secret meeting had been called to address the growing media storm, to strategize the next steps in their battle for survival. But as the minutes ticked by, the tension in the room only deepened. Everyone knew something was wrong, but no one dared to say it out loud. Her oldest son, James, who had always been her rock, was the first to break the silence. "We can't keep hiding from this, Mum. We need to act fast. If we don't counterattack now, we're going to lose everything." Emily nodded, her gaze never leaving the table. She had been counting on James to keep the family united, to be the voice of reason. But now, with the walls closing in, she felt the cracks in their unity. It wasn't just the press that was tearing them apart. It was the secrets that had started to spill from within. And then the door opened. Her youngest daughter, Chloe, stepped inside, her face pale, her eyes darting nervously. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Chloe had been in the thick of things. From the start, supportive, loyal. But something was different now. Her face was drawn, her body tense, as if she had been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. "Chloe," Emily said, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and concern. "What's wrong? We need to make decisions." But Chloe didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped to the center of the room, her gaze flicking nervously to the others. The tension in the room only deepened. Emily could feel the weight of the moment building. Something was about to change.
"It's not about the strategy," Chloe said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's about the leaks." James's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" Emily felt her stomach twist. She knew what was coming. "Chloe?"
"What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chloe hesitated, her gaze flicking toward the door as if she were expecting someone to walk in, someone who would confirm the worst fear she had been carrying.
I never wanted this to happen, but I've been hearing things, seeing things, and I didn't know what else to do." A sharp intake of breath echoed around the room, and Emily's pulse quickened. What did she mean? Before Emily could ask, James stood up, his voice filled with disbelief. "Chloe, no, you didn't." Chloe looked down at the floor, her hands trembling. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with the weight of betrayal. Emily's heart sank as the realization hit her like a blow. "You've been talking
"To the press, haven't you?" James accused, his voice low but full of venom. Chloe's shoulders sagged as if the truth had been crushing her for far too long.
"I didn't mean for it to get this far," she whispered, barely audible. "But things were spiraling, and I didn't know how to stop it. I thought if I could control the narrative, maybe we could have some control over what happened." The room exploded. James slammed his fist onto the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "You thought you could control this by throwing us under the bus?" His voice was a low growl, but the hurt and betrayal were unmistakable. "You're the
"One who leaked the emails to the press, aren't you?" Chloe's face turned red as she looked up, her eyes filled with guilt. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. It wasn't supposed to destroy everything." Emily sat motionless, her breath shallow. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The one person she had trusted, the one person who had always seemed to stand by her, had been the one to betray her trust. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. The shock was like a cold slap to the face, and her world tilted dangerously on its axis.
"You've ruined us, Chloe," James spat, his voice thick with disbelief. "You've given Simon Daniels exactly what he wanted. You've put us in even more danger." Emily's heart pounded, and for a moment everything felt distant, out of reach.
Her vision blurred as she looked at Chloe, her daughter, her flesh and blood, standing there so small, so broken. How could this have happened? How could someone so close to her betray her this way? "Chloe, you—" Emily's voice cracked, her words faltering as she tried to find something to say. The hurt was too much. "You let them in. You let them take everything." Chloe's eyes welled with tears, but she remained silent, her hands clenching into fists. Emily saw the desperation in her daughter's face, but it wasn't enough to absolve her. Nothing could fix what had been broken in that moment. The room was still, except for the faint sound of Chloe's breathing as she fought to hold back tears. Emily stood up, her legs trembling beneath her. She had fought so hard to protect her family, to build something that would last. But now, everything was shattering in front of her eyes. "Get out," Emily said, her voice low and broken. "I can't do this, not now." Chloe flinched, but she didn't move. Emily's heart ached at the sight of her daughter standing there, lost and defeated. But there was no room for weakness now, not for any of them. With a final, bitter glance at her family, Chloe turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The family was divided. Trust had been broken. The weight of betrayal was heavier than Emily had ever imagined. And as she stood there, alone with the wreckage of her once unified family, the question hung in the air. Who could she trust now? The tension in the room was unbearable. Emily knew the road ahead would be filled with even more betrayal, and the hardest fight of her life was just beginning. The world was closing in on Emily Sinclair. The media was relentless. The accusations never stopped. Each day, another headline, another scathing report, another comment from Simon Daniels, the rival business magnate who had made it his mission to tear her family down. Emily's every move was dissected, her words twisted, and every possible detail of her life seemed to be up for grabs. The pressure had never been more suffocating. But Emily had a secret. It was a truth, buried deep in the shadows of her past, one that she knew could change everything. If only she could use it, if only she had the right moment. She had kept it hidden for so long, knowing that the consequences of revealing it could be catastrophic. Yet now, with everything at stake, the weight of it seemed almost unbearable. She sat in her private office, her hands gripping the edge of the desk as her mind raced. The walls around her were lined with family portraits, each one a reminder of the empire she had built, an empire that was now crumbling. The phone on her desk buzzed, snapping her from her thoughts. It was her lawyer. "Emily," the lawyer's voice crackled through the line. "We need to talk. This is our chance, but it's risky. You know what I'm talking about." Her pulse quickened. She knew exactly what he meant. A soft knock echoed through the door, and without waiting for a response, the lawyer entered. He was a man in his 50s, sharp-featured, with an air of calm determination. He closed the door behind him, his face grave. "It's time," he said, his voice low. "Simon Daniels and the press are relentless, and the only way to turn the tables
Is with what we've been keeping under wraps. You've got to make a decision." Emily's gaze hardened.
She had spent years building a reputation, a family legacy, and now, here she was, backed into a corner by her own creation. The world thought they knew everything about her, but there was one thing they didn't know. "You're right," she replied, her voice clipped. "But you understand the risk. If we reveal this, we open up a whole new can of worms. It could destroy more than just Simon. It could bring down people I've trusted for years," her lawyer nodded, knowing the stakes. "I know, but Simon has already damaged your reputation, and now he's going after your family. You can't afford to wait any longer." Emily took a deep breath, the weight of the decision heavy on her shoulders. She knew she was walking a fine line, that one wrong move could bring everything crashing down. But she also knew that this was her only chance to fight back. The room was thick with anticipation as the lawyer slid a set of confidential documents across the desk. Emily's eyes flicked over the papers, her heart racing. These were the names of people who had been involved in the secret that she had held so closely. Names that, if revealed, would send shockwaves through the business world, revealing not just her own missteps, but the involvement of powerful figures who had supported her in the shadows. "We're talking about a game changer, Emily," her lawyer said quietly. "But you need to be ready. Once this is out, there's no going back." She nodded, the gravity of the moment settling over her like a heavy blanket. She hadn't built this empire just to watch it fall. She wasn't about to let Simon Daniels or anyone else tear her down without a fight. "We need to prepare a statement," Emily said, her voice hardening with resolve. "This won't be a confession. It'll be a revelation, a way to show that I'm
not the only one with skeletons in the closet. This secret will expose more than just me. It will expose the ones who thought they could get away with their own dirty dealings."
The lawyer raised an eyebrow, impressed by her determination. "You're willing to go this far?" Emily's gaze hardened. "If I have to burn it all down to save my family, I will." As the lawyer left the room to begin preparing the release, Emily remained in the silence, her thoughts swirling. She had always been the one in control, the one who called the shots. But this was different. This secret, if revealed, would not only change the course of her own life, it could take down several others with her. And she had to be sure that she was prepared for the fallout. Who else was involved? The question echoed in her mind. There were powerful allies who had helped her cover up this mess for years, but who else had a stake in the deception? The deeper she looked into the past, the more dangerous the answers became. She stood up, walking toward the window that overlooked the sprawling estate, now filled with the ominous presence of reporters lurking outside. The world was watching, waiting for her to crumble. But Emily Sinclair had never been one to go down without a fight. She was prepared to reveal the truth, her truth, and turn the tables once and for all. The storm was far from over, but this was the calm before the storm. The pieces were in motion. The hidden secret was ready to be exposed, and with it, Emily's final gambit to reclaim her power and dismantle Simon Daniels once and for all. The tension in the room was suffocating as Emily Sinclair sat at the head of the table, her family gathered around her. They were in the midst of a high-stakes strategy session, preparing for the next round in their battle against Simon Daniels. The press had been relentless, and every move they made was scrutinized. The family had rallied, determined to fight back, and they had all put their trust in their long-time family lawyer, Richard West, to guide them through the storm. But as the minutes ticked by, something didn't feel right. Richard had been with the family for years. He had been the one who helped Emily navigate some of the toughest decisions, the one she had leaned on in times of crisis. But today, as he sat across from her, there was a slight unease in his expression, a tension that she couldn't ignore. "All right, Richard," Emily said, her voice sharp as she pushed the pile of documents across the table. "We need to prepare for Simon's next move. What do we have on our side?" Richard shifted in his seat, his eyes darting around the room, his fingers tapped nervously on the edge of the folder. "We have a few options, Emily. I've been in contact with some of your old allies. They're willing to help, but there's something you need to know." The room fell silent. Everyone looked at Richard, confusion written across their faces. Emily's brow furrowed as she leaned forward. "What is it, Richard?" The lawyer hesitated, then cleared his throat, as though preparing to drop a bombshell. "There's a leak, a serious one. It seems someone on your team has been feeding information to Simon Daniels. The emails, the strategy plans, everything we've discussed has been getting back to him."
"And I think I know who?" Emily's pulse quickened. She felt the room grow colder, the tension building. Who?
She demanded, her voice strained with disbelief. Richard hesitated, but then, in a moment of apparent weakness, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long sigh. "It's me, Emily." The words hung in the air like a curse, and for a moment, the room was paralyzed by shock. Emily's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her trusted lawyer, her ally, had been working with the very person trying to destroy her family. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Emily's breath came in shallow gasps, her world suddenly tilting on its axis. She couldn't process it, couldn't comprehend the depth of this betrayal. "Richard, what the hell are you talking?"
About James, her oldest son, stood up, his face red with anger.
"You've been working with Simon Daniels all this time?" Richard didn't flinch. He remained eerily calm, his eyes avoiding theirs. "I'm sorry, but it was the only way. Daniels offered a deal. He promised to protect me." "Protect you?" Emily cut him off, her voice cold, dangerous. "You sold us out. You sold your loyalty to the highest bidder." Richard's eyes flickered, but he didn't respond. He knew there was no excuse for what he had done. The shock of the revelation hit Emily like a physical blow. She had trusted Richard with everything, her family's future, their secrets, their safety, and he had turned on them. The very person who was supposed to protect them had been the one feeding Simon Daniels the information that had led to their downfall. "You've been working with him?" Emily's voice was shaking now, a mixture of anger and betrayal threatening to explode.
"All this time?" Richard finally met her eyes, a hint of regret in his gaze. "It wasn't personal, it was business. I had no choice." James slammed his fist onto the table, his voice a low growl. "This isn't just about business, Richard. This is our family. You knew what was at stake and you betrayed us." "Enough," Emily said, her voice chilling. She stood up slowly, her gaze never leaving Richard. "You're fired. Get out."
Richard didn't argue. He didn't try to explain himself. He simply stood, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and walked out of the room without a word. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving the family in stunned silence. Emily stood there, motionless for a long moment, the weight of the betrayal settling in her chest. This was more than a legal setback. This was personal, and it hurt more than anything she had ever experienced. The trust she had placed in Richard, the man who had been a constant in her life for years, had been shattered in an instant. Her hands shook as she looked at the pile of documents that had just moments ago felt like the solution to everything. Now they were useless. The family's legal strategy was in shambles. With Richard gone, they were left with no one to guide them through the storm. What now? Chloe's voice was barely a whisper, the first words she had spoken since the revelation. She looked at her mother, her eyes wide with concern. Emily took a long, steadying breath. She wasn't sure what they would do next. The situation had just become 100 times more complicated, and the trust they had relied on had been ripped away. But Emily Sinclair was not one to back down. If Richard had played both sides, if he thought that betraying her would break her, he was wrong. This was just another obstacle, another challenge to overcome. "We fight back," Emily said, her voice low and determined. "We rebuild our strategy, and we make sure Simon Daniels knows exactly who he's up against. This isn't over." But even as she spoke, the weight of Richard's betrayal hung heavy in the air. The road ahead was darker, more uncertain, and more treacherous than ever before. The clock was ticking, and Emily Sinclair felt the walls closing in. With Simon Daniels and his team closing in from all sides, the weight of their accusations, the betrayal of her lawyer, and the relentless media, scrutiny pressing down on her, she knew it was time for something drastic. They couldn't afford to keep playing the game by their opponent's rules any longer. Emily gathered her remaining allies in the sleek, dark-panelled conference room, her mind racing through options, each decision critical, each moment pressing them further toward the edge of defeat. Her children sat around her, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and determination. The room felt like a war zone, filled with the tension of a family fighting for its survival. "We need to take control of this narrative," Emily said, her voice low but resolute. "We've spent too long defending ourselves. It's time to turn the tables." Her son, James, was the first to speak, his tone filled with cautious optimism.
How do we do that, Mom? Everyone's already convinced we're guilty.
"Simon's got the press, he's got the retailers, and now we've lost Richard. Our legal strategy is a mess." Emily's gaze hardened as she looked at her son. "I'm not here to lose, James. I've fought too hard to let it all slip away now." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. "I've already made the call. We need someone who can shake things up, someone who won't back down no matter what. I've hired Victor Aldridge." A stunned silence filled the room. Victor Aldridge. The name was legendary in legal circles, renowned for his unrelenting approach in high-profile cases, known for dismantling even the most complex of accusations with precision and strategy. He was a no-nonsense attorney who didn't play by the rules, and his reputation was both feared and admired.
"Victor Aldridge?" James echoed, disbelief in his voice. "Mum, he's been involved in some of the most controversial cases in history. He's known for playing hardball. Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure," Emily replied firmly. "We've been
fighting defensively this whole time, trying to avoid the spotlight. It's time to make them see us as a force to be reckoned with. Victor will lead the charge, and we'll show them exactly who they're dealing with." She knew the risks of hiring someone like Aldridge. He played the game at the highest stakes, and his tactics were known to rattle the most composed. But Emily had made up her mind. They needed to go on the offensive, and Victor Aldridge was the only one who could do it. The next day, the media was abuzz. News outlets reported the shocking turn of events. Emily Sinclair had hired Victor Aldridge to defend her family. The press, already hungry for new angles, swarmed the story. Some called it a desperate move, others saw it as a sign that Emily was ready to fight back with everything she had. The tide was starting to shift, even before Aldridge had made his first appearance in the courtroom. Days later, the courtroom became the ultimate battleground. The media filled the seats, cameras flashing incessantly as the drama unfolded. Emily, now accompanied by Aldridge and her remaining legal team, stood in the center of the room. The opposing side, Simon Daniels and his legal team, sat across from them, their smug expressions reflecting the confidence they had gained over the past weeks. Victor Aldridge stood tall, his presence dominating the room. He wasted no time. In his opening statement, he turned the courtroom into a fierce arena where every word was a calculated strike. He immediately attacked the credibility of Simon Daniels' accusations, picking apart the evidence with surgical precision. He didn't just defend Emily, he went on the offensive, accusing Daniels of orchestrating a campaign of manipulation
and deceit. "Mr. Daniels," Aldridge said, his voice sharp as a blade, "wants you to believe that the Sinclair family is guilty based on a handful of dubious documents. He's using fear to control the narrative. But what he doesn't want you
to see is the truth. The truth that, despite the accusations, this family has done nothing wrong." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The audience, once skeptical, was now beginning to shift. The media cameras captured every reaction, every word, as the tide slowly began to turn. Emily watched from the sidelines, her heart pounding, her trust in Aldridge growing with every sentence. Aldridge's strategy was simple but powerful. He exposed the inconsistencies in Simon Daniels's case, used his own words against him, and presented a new perspective, one where the Sinclair family was not the villain, but the victim of a carefully orchestrated smear campaign. As the days of the trial dragged on, Aldridge's cross-examinations became legendary. He unearthed lies and contradictions in the testimonies, dismantling the opposition's case piece by piece. The media, once obsessed with the scandal, now began to question whether they had been too quick to judge. "Is it possible, Mr. Daniels," Aldridge asked, during one particularly intense cross-examination, "that you've been so focused on destroying a successful family that you've overlooked your own motives? Could it be that your desire for control
over the Sinclair empire has led you to twist the truth?" Daniels visibly flinched, his composure cracking under the pressure.
The cameras caught every moment, and for the first time, the public began to see the cracks in his carefully curated image. By the end of the trial, the courtroom atmosphere had shifted. The jury, once influenced by the media frenzy, was now looking at the case with fresh eyes. Some of the key witnesses from the opposition began to falter, and the media coverage took a dramatic turn. As Emily sat in the courtroom, watching the shift in momentum, she felt the weight of the past weeks lift. They weren't out of the woods yet, but the public's opinion was beginning to change. Aldridge had done what he promised. He had turned the tide. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in weeks, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. The Sinclair family wasn't finished, not yet. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. Emily Sinclair sat at the defense table, her posture poised but her eyes sharp, like a lioness preparing to pounce. The media cameras were rolling, capturing every moment, every gesture. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation as Victor Aldridge, the family's fearless attorney, rose to his feet for what promised to be a dramatic closing argument. Simon Daniels and his legal team sat across the room, their faces set in smug, confident expressions. They had done their best to build a case against the Sinclair family, and the media had eaten up every second of it. But Emily could feel the shift. She had been on the defensive for so long, but now, with Aldridge's strategic brilliance, the scales were finally tipping in her favor. Still, there was one piece left to play, and Emily knew it was time. Aldridge was in the middle of his closing statement when he paused suddenly, looking directly at Emily. She caught his gaze, and he nodded. This was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. The court fell into hushed silence, the weight of the moment palpable. "Your Honor," Aldridge said, his voice steady but filled with gravitas, "we've heard the allegations, the accusations, and the twisted narratives from Mr. Daniels and his legal team. But what we haven't heard, what no one has been willing to acknowledge, is the truth. The truth that has been hiding in plain sight. And today, it will come to light." He motioned to Emily, who stood up slowly, the eyes of the courtroom now fully on her. For a brief moment, Emily's gaze flicked to the jury, to the media, and finally to Simon Daniels, who was now visibly sweating, his smug expression faltering.
Ever so slightly. She could almost hear his thoughts, could almost feel his confidence starting to slip. This was it. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the truth is often far more complicated than it seems," Emily began, her voice calm yet undeniably forceful.
"For months, I have been the target of a campaign designed to destroy not just my family, but everything we have worked for. For weeks you've heard accusations about financial misdeeds, fraud, and deceit. But there's something you haven't been told, something that changes everything. The room was dead silent now, the audience hanging on every word. Emily nodded to Aldridge, who signalled to one of the court officers. A moment later, a small piece of evidence was placed before the judge. A recording device, neatly enclosed in a clear case. The room seemed to hold its breath as the sound technician connected it to the court's audio system. "I'd like to submit this recording into evidence," Emily said, her voice unwavering. "It is a conversation between Mr. Simon Daniels and one of his associates, a conversation that reveals the true nature of this entire scandal." Gasps rippled through the room. The reporters, their pens paused in mid-air, the lawyers on both sides tense and alert, the jury leaning forward in their seats. Emily's heart raced as the recording began to play. The voice that echoed through the courtroom was unmistakable. Simon Daniels. "We need to destroy the Sinclair family," he said, his tone smooth and calculated, a dangerous edge lurking beneath. "They've been getting too powerful, too influential. If we bring them down now, we can take everything, reclaim the assets, the brand, the control. I'll make sure the media paints them as criminals. We've got the right leverage, the
right people in place. This is our chance." The courtroom was filled with stunned silence. Simon's words hung in the air, each sentence a damning admission.
The recording continued, his voice growing colder, more calculated. "Once the Sinclairs are out of the picture, their empire will fall right into our hands. It'll be a clean sweep." By the time the recording ended, the room was in an uproar. The judge banged his gavel, trying to regain control of the chaos. Simon Daniels, who had been sitting confidently moments ago, was now pale, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. His legal team looked visibly shaken, unable to mask their shock. Emily stood tall, her eyes locked on Simon as the weight of the evidence settled over him like a crushing blow. This was not just a defense, it was an offense that completely dismantled his carefully constructed narrative. She had turned the tables in the most dramatic way possible. "Mr. Daniels," Aldridge said coldly, turning his gaze to the rival businessman, "I think the public has heard enough. The people you've been manipulating, the press, the investors, the public, will now know the truth. This wasn't a case of fraud, but a well-orchestrated scheme to destroy a family and seize their assets." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as the media began capturing every moment, their cameras snapping wildly. Some were shaking their heads in disbelief, others were already writing down their stories. The shift was undeniable. The public was now beginning to see the Sinclairs as the victims, not the villains. Simon Daniels, caught in the web of his own words, stood up in a panic.
This is a lie," he shouted, his voice breaking with desperation. But no one was listening anymore. The damage had been done. The judge, who had been silent until now, spoke sternly. "Mr. Daniels, you will be given the opportunity
to respond to these allegations. But let it be clear, the gravity of what has just been revealed is not lost on this court. I'm ordering an immediate review of this recording and all related evidence." Emily sat down, her heart still pounding, but now with the thrill of victory building inside her. The tide had turned. The courtroom had gone from doubting her to standing in her corner. Outside, the media was already reporting the bombshell. "Scandal exposed, Simon Daniels behind Sinclair's fall," read one headline. "Sinclair family vindicated after recording. Reveals plot," read another. The public, once skeptical, was now beginning to rally behind her family. Sympathy shifted and support grew. The moment was pivotal, not just for Emily and her family, but for the entire world watching. The scandal that had threatened to destroy them had now become the very thing that would restore their legacy. As Emily looked around the courtroom, the realization hit her. The battle was far from over, but this was the moment she had needed. The game had changed. The air in the courtroom was electric, crackling with tension as Emily Sinclair sat at the defense table, her posture unwavering. Simon Daniels, once so confident and poised, now stood at the opposite end of the courtroom, his face flushed with anger and disbelief. The recording that had exposed him as the mastermind behind the campaign to ruin the Sinclair family had been played for the jury, the media, and the world. But Simon, ever the showman, had tried to maintain his calm, trying to salvage whatever shred of dignity he had left. But it was clear now, there was no way out. The judge called for a recess, allowing the media time to process the staggering revelations. Outside the courtroom, the press was in a frenzy. News outlets scrambled to cover the bombshell, and social media exploded with reactions. The public was no longer questioning the Sinclairs' innocence. They were demanding accountability for Simon Daniels. Emily knew that this was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment to end it once and for all. She had exposed Simon's lies in court, but there was one more stage left, the confrontation. Later that evening, a live television special was scheduled, an exclusive interview with both Emily Sinclair and Simon Daniels. It was to be the final battleground, the last public confrontation that would either solidify Emily's victory or allow Simon one last chance to claw back some of his crumbling empire. The stage was set. The cameras rolled. The host, a seasoned journalist with a reputation for asking the hard questions, stood between Emily and Simon, her eyes flickering back and forth between the two as she prepared to moderate what was sure to be an explosive showdown. "Welcome, everyone," the host began, her voice calm, but the weight of the situation made her words sharp. "Tonight, we have two of the most influential figures in business sitting across from each other. Emily Sinclair, matriarch of the Sinclair family, and Simon Daniels, the rival businessman at the center of the controversy that has gripped the nation."
"Welcome to both of you." Simon gave a stiff, forced smile, his hand gripping the armrest as if trying to steady himself. He had not anticipated the public reaction to the revelation. The walls were closing in on him, and he knew it. But still,
his ego refused to let go. He was going to fight until the bitter end. Emily, on the other hand, sat calmly, composed. Her eyes were focused, her face serene, but behind her composure was a fierce resolve. She had been through the storm and come out on top, and now she was ready to deliver the final blow. The host looked between the two. "Let's start with you, Simon. After the court revelations, the public is starting to question your role in the collapse of the Sinclair family's empire. How do you respond to the allegations that you orchestrated this entire scandal?" Simon's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing. He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come out as smoothly as they usually did. The facade he had spent years building was crumbling under the weight of the truth. Simon began, but his voice faltered. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I've already said that these accusations are a fabrication. It's all lies. The Sinclairs have a history of financial mismanagement. They've been on the brink of collapse for years, and I was simply trying to protect my own interests. Nothing more." The host raised an eyebrow. "But Simon, we've all heard the recording. Your own voice, admitting that you orchestrated the campaign to destroy the Sinclair family for your own gain. You were the one pulling the strings." Simon's eyes flicked nervously to the audience, his hands clenched tightly on the armrests. The host's words were a direct shot, a reminder that everything he had said, up until now, had been exposed. The host continued, her voice steady. "You've tried to position yourself as the victim here, but the evidence shows otherwise. The public is watching this unfold and the narrative has shifted. What do you have to say to that?" Simon's smug expression was gone now, replaced with the flicker of panic. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words seemed to evaporate. Emily saw her moment. She sat up straight, her voice cutting through the tension. "What Simon doesn't want you to know is this," she began, her tone calm but firm. His entire campaign, his entire strategy was based on one simple premise: destroy the Sinclairs and take everything. He knew that our success was a threat to him, and so he chose to manipulate the media, use his connections and smear our name, to weaken us. And then once we were vulnerable, he swooped in for the kill. The room was silent. The host, momentarily stunned by Emily's directness, nodded for her to continue. "It's not just business, it's personal for Simon. His need for control, his greed, it's all led him to this point. He thought that by tearing my family apart, he could own everything we had worked for. But he underestimated one thing. He underestimated the truth. The truth always has a way of coming out." The audience shifted, murmurs rippling through the crowd. The media cameras flashed, catching every word, every reaction. The public, who had once been on the fence, was now leaning toward the Sinclairs. They saw the truth in Emily's eyes. They saw Simon for what he was, a man desperate to cling to power by any means necessary. Simon, now visibly sweating, tried to regain control, but it was too late.
"This is all an attack. You have no proof," he shouted, his voice shaking. Emily didn't flinch. "You heard the recording, Simon. Your words, your actions, they're right there for everyone to see. You can deny it all you want, but the truth is out. You can't take it back." For a brief moment, Simon Daniels looked like a man who had been cornered.
The smug, unshakable confidence that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a man desperately trying to maintain his dignity, his power. But the truth had shattered him. The public saw through the mask. Emily remained calm, her face composed as she let the full weight of her words sink in. The damage was done. Simon Daniels' carefully crafted image had unraveled before the world's eyes. "I've spent my life building something meaningful," Emily continued, her voice resolute, "and I'm not going to let anyone take that away from me. Not Simon, not anyone." The host looked at Simon one last time. His shoulders slumped as the reality of his situation settled in. There was nothing more to say. The public had made up its mind. The courtroom had been a battleground, but this confrontation, this public shaming of Simon Daniels, had sealed his fate. The tables had turned. Emily Sinclair had not only survived the storm, but she had emerged victorious. The dust settled over the Sinclairs like a heavy fog lifting. The courtroom drama had played out, the public spectacle had unfolded, and now, as the media coverage slowed to a trickle, a new narrative began to emerge, one that shifted dramatically in Emily Sinclair's favor. For weeks the headlines had painted her family as the villains, embroiled in scandal and deceit. But after the explosive revelations in court, the story began to change. The once damning headlines, "Sinclair family in financial scandal," "Sinclair empire collapses under fraud allegations," were quickly replaced with new, more hopeful ones. Sinclair's fight back, exposing the real villain. Behind this scheme, the truth behind the Sinclair family scandal, how they were framed. Emily Sinclair's triumph, how one woman beat the odds and reclaimed her legacy. The shift was palpable. The public, that had once turned its back on Emily and her family, now began to rally behind them, their voices louder with each passing day. Social media was flooded with messages of support, from loyal fans who had stuck by the Sinclairs to new followers who had only recently learned the truth. Hashtags like "I'm Team Sinclair" and "Justice for the Sinclairs" trended worldwide, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of resilience and redemption, inspired by Emily's strength. At the same time, sponsors who had cut ties with the family in the midst of the scandal began to return. Retailers, once hesitant to associate with the tarnished brand, issued public statements of support. "We believe in second chances," one prominent retailer stated. "Good American Family stands for perseverance, strength, and integrity, and we are proud to welcome them back into our circle of partners." Another major cosmetics brand announced they would be re-signing their endorsement deal with the family, citing their commitment to empowering women and businesses that overcome adversity. Behind closed doors, Emily and her team worked tirelessly to rebuild. It wasn't just about money or deals anymore, it was about reclaiming their place in the world. The family began to release new campaigns focusing on their values: resilience, honesty, and family. Their advertisements now told a story not just of luxury and success, but of overcoming obstacles, of fighting for what's right. The public took notice. Their new narrative was not one of scandal, but of triumph. Emily sat in her office, looking out over the city skyline. The weight of the past few months had been overwhelming, but now she could finally breathe. She had fought back with everything she had, and now, with the tide turning in her favor, she was starting to rebuild what had once been thought lost. Her phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from James. "Sponsors are back. The rebranding is working. We're getting calls for partnerships again. You did it, Mum. We did it." A small smile tugged at Emily's lips. Her family was stronger than ever, not because they had money, but because they had fought for the truth and had come out victorious. They had been broken, but now they were whole again. They had rebuilt not just their brand, but their credibility, their integrity, and their pride. Meanwhile, Simon Daniels, once so confident and untouchable, was now facing his own reckoning. The legal fallout from the scandal was swift and severe. Prosecutors, now armed with the recording that had exposed his scheme, filed multiple charges against him for defamation, corporate manipulation, and conspiracy. His assets were frozen, his business dealings scrutinized, and the once feared tycoon found himself surrounded by a team of lawyers just to try and save what was left of his reputation. He was no longer the puppet master, he was the one under the microscope, his every move monitored and questioned. The media that had once fawned over him now turned their attention to his downfall as stories emerged about his shady tactics, his attempt to seize the Sinclair family's empire, and his role in the smear campaign. The public, once enamored with Simon's wealth and power, now saw him for what he truly was, a man who would do anything to get ahead, even if it meant destroying others in the process. The man who had sought to take everything from Emily Sinclair now stood to lose everything himself. In the midst of this, Emily took the stage at a charity gala, her face calm, her presence commanding. The cameras flashed as she stepped to the microphone, ready to speak about the future of Good American Family. But this time she wasn't speaking from a place of desperation, she was speaking from a place of strength. "This brand is not just about products or profits," she began, her voice steady and full of conviction. "It's about family, it's about resilience, it's about never backing down, no matter how hard the world pushes you. We have faced challenges publicly, privately, but we've overcome them. And today, I stand here not as a woman fighting to keep what's hers, but as a woman who has learned that no matter how deep the darkness, there is always a way out. And I am proud to say that Good American Family will continue to be a symbol of strength, of hope, and of the power of the truth. The applause was deafening. People were no longer looking at her as the scandal-ridden celebrity. They were looking at her as a symbol of perseverance and courage. She had won. As the night unfolded, Emily stood with her family, watching as the pieces of their empire slowly came back together. The sponsors, the loyal fans, the renewed partnerships, they were all returning. More importantly, the Sinclairs had their dignity back, and they were ready to take on whatever came next, stronger than ever before. The storm had passed. The new narrative was clear. Emily Sinclair and her family were not just survivors, they were victors, and the world was watching, ready to see what they would do next. The dust had barely settled from the trial, but the Sinclair family's victory was far from complete. Emily Sinclair had fought tooth and nail to reclaim her family's reputation, and the public's perception was beginning to shift in their favor. The media, once buzzing with scandal, was now flooded with stories of triumph and redemption. But there was one last piece of the puzzle to fall into place. Emily sat in her office, her fingers idly tracing the edge of the desk as she reviewed the latest reports, sponsors returning, social media posts praising her family's resilience, and new partnerships lining up. It felt like the war was over, but something inside her knew that the real battle wasn't just about the headlines. It was about securing their future. That's when the unexpected happened. It started with a phone call. "Emily, I think you
Need to see this," her assistant said, her voice shaky with excitement. "You won't believe what's happening." Emily's heart raced as she followed her assistant into the media room where the latest news broadcast was playing.
The host was speaking to a former business partner of the Sinclair family, Diana Westbrook, a high-profile philanthropist and one of the industry's most influential figures. Emily had worked with Diana in the past, but after the scandal broke, she, like many others, had distanced herself from the family. The words that came from Diana's mouth sent a jolt through Emily. "I'm here today to set the record straight," Diana began, her voice unwavering. "For months, I've watched the Sinclair family be torn apart by lies and manipulation, but I can no longer stay silent. I and many others have been working behind the scenes to uncover the truth about Simon Daniels. We've gathered evidence, we've spoken to those involved, and it's time the world knows. Simon Daniels was the mastermind behind the entire smear campaign." The camera cut to Emily, whose expression had shifted from confusion to disbelief. She hadn't expected this. Diana Westbrook, the very woman who had once distanced herself from the family in the wake of the scandal, was now standing by them, publicly exposing the full extent of Simon's underhanded tactics. As the broadcast continued, more high-profile figures appeared on screen one by one, each revealing how they, too, had been quietly working to undermine Simon Daniels's plans. Jonathan Blake, a renowned tech mogul and former partner of Simon's, spoke up next. "I knew Simon was up to something, but I didn't realize the extent of it until the Sinclairs were already in his crosshairs. When I saw what he was doing, I knew I couldn't just stand by. I've worked with Emily in the past, and I believe in her vision. I'm here to tell you that Simon Daniels will stop at nothing to destroy those who stand in his way, but Emily Sinclair is not alone." Then came Liam Carter, an award-winning actor who had once been one of the face of Good American
Family's campaigns.
He had been quick to distance himself from the family when the scandal first broke, but now he stood before the camera, his face serious. I owe Emily and her family an apology. When the media storm hit, I made a hasty decision to sever ties with them. But after seeing the truth unfold, I realized how wrong I was. I'm proud to stand here today and tell the world that I support the Sinclairs. They didn't deserve this. No one deserves to be treated the way Simon Daniels treated them. Each powerful ally who stepped forward brought with them an undeniable weight of influence, whether it was financial support, public credibility, or political connections. The people who had once stepped back, fearful of being caught up in the scandal, were now aligning themselves with the family. These weren't just people who had spoken out. They were the power brokers, the change makers, the influential figures who could shift the tide in an instant. Their newfound support felt like the final pieces of the puzzle falling into place for the Sinclairs. The impact was immediate. The media narrative shifted once again, this time to one of overwhelming support for the Sinclair family. What had started as an uphill battle to clear their name was now becoming a public statement of strength. Emily watched the interviews unfold, her emotions running deep. There was a sense of vindication, of validation. The family had been written off by many, abandoned in their time of need. But now they had a powerful army of allies standing beside them, ready to defend their legacy. The family's comeback wasn't just complete, it was solidified. The once shattered Sinclair empire now had the support and foundation it needed to rebuild. Sponsors returned in droves, knowing that the public's faith in the family was growing stronger by the day. Their brand was once again a symbol of perseverance, of rising from the ashes. Simon Daniels, on the other hand, was facing legal repercussions that would take years to untangle. The floodgates had opened, and the evidence of his manipulation, his backdoor dealings and his attempt to destroy the Sinclairs was being unveiled piece by piece. His world, which had once seemed impenetrable, was now crumbling under the weight of his own greed and deceit. The tables had turned completely. As Emily sat back in her office, watching the media coverage unfold, she felt a new sense of peace settle over her. The battle had been long and brutal, but the family had won, not just because of their own determination, but because they had the support of those who believed in the truth, and in them. Her phone buzzed once more, this time with a message from James. "We've got this, Mum. We're back." And for the first time in months, Emily smiled, knowing that their comeback was not just a victory for the Sinclair family, it was a victory for truth, for justice, and for the power of standing together in the face of adversity. The Sinclairs had been
knocked down, but now they were stronger than ever.
The sun was setting outside the Sinclair family estate, casting a warm, golden glow over the sprawling grounds. Inside, the family gathered around the long oak dining table in their private dining room, a place that once felt like home, filled with laughter, shared stories, and love. Now it felt quieter, heavier. The echoes of betrayal and mistrust still lingered in the corners, but today there was a chance for healing. Emily Sinclair sat at the head of the table, her gaze soft but heavy with the weight of the past months. Her children, James, Chloe, and Lucas, sat around her, each of them looking worn, their faces marked by the emotional scars of the scandal, the public humiliation, and the fractured trust that had torn them apart. The silence between them was thick, uncomfortable, but beneath it there was an unspoken desire for reconciliation. James, the oldest, sat with his arms crossed, his jaw set. His eyes were tired, his expression one of caution. Chloe, the youngest, kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her sleeve. Lucas, the middle child, had his gaze cast downward, the weight of guilt still heavy on his shoulders. Emily's heart ached as she looked at them. They had all been through so much, and yet she knew that healing would never come if they couldn't start by facing the pain together. "I know it's been hard," Emily began, her voice quiet, though it carried a depth of emotion. "The past few months, it's been a battle. And I haven't been the mother I should have been to you. I've made mistakes. I pushed too hard. I kept things from you, and I didn't see how much you were struggling until it was too late. I am so sorry for that." The words hung in the air, and Emily felt the weight of their meaning. She had spent so much time focused on the outside world, the media, the public battle, that she had failed to recognize the fracture lines in her own family. But now, as she looked at her children, she knew that her greatest fight wasn't with Simon Daniels or the press. It was with herself, with the mistakes she had made, and with the hurt she had caused her own flesh and blood. James let out a deep sigh, his gaze softening slightly, but there was still a wariness in his eyes. "It wasn't just you, Mom," he said, his voice low but steady. "We all made mistakes. We let everything get out of control. I should have seen the cracks earlier, should have known that we were pushing ourselves too hard, but we can't change the past. What matters is how we move forward." Chloe lifted her head, her eyes still brimming with unshed tears. "I never meant to hurt anyone," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was scared, and
I thought I was protecting us. But I betrayed your trust, Mum, and I'm sorry. I can never take back what I did, but I want to try to make it right." Lucas, who had been silent until now, finally looked up, meeting Emily's eyes.
"We all went through this together. It was hard to understand why everything happened the way it did. But we're still here, aren't we? We've been through worse, and we survived. We're still a family." His voice cracked with the weight
Of emotion, but there was strength in his words. Emily's eyes welled with tears, but she didn't let them fall.
Instead, she stood up and moved toward her children, her heart swelling with love and regret. She reached out to each of them, pulling them into a tight embrace, one by one. "We are," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We're still here, and we'll always be here for each other, no matter what." The tension that had simmered for so long began to dissipate, slowly replaced by a sense of quiet understanding. They had all been through the fire, each of them scarred, in their own way, but in this moment they found the strength to come together. It wasn't perfect, and the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they had taken the first step toward healing. After a long silence, James looked at his mother, his expression more open than it had been in weeks. "It's going to take time, Mum, but we'll get through it. We've got each other. That's all that matters." Chloe nodded in agreement, wiping away a tear. "We'll rebuild together." Emily looked around the table at her children, her heart swelling with pride. This was the family she had fought so hard for. This was the legacy she wanted to leave behind, not just one of success, but one of love, loyalty, and unwavering support. As they sat down together, the weight of the past months lifting from their shoulders, Emily knew that this was just the beginning. The future was uncertain, but they would face it together, stronger and more united than ever before. The family, broken and torn apart by betrayal, was now healing. They had found their way back to each other, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. The Sinclairs were no longer just survivors of a scandal. They were a family reborn, ready to take on whatever came next. The grand ballroom was filled with guests, the air humming with excitement. It had been months since the Sinclair family had been thrust into the public eye, their lives torn apart by scandal, betrayal, and relentless media scrutiny. But tonight, in this moment, they were not just the subjects of gossip or media frenzy. They were the visionaries of a new beginning, a new chapter. The room buzzed with anticipation as the Sinclairs made their entrance. Emily Sinclair, the matriarch, walked to the center of the stage, her family standing behind her. The familiar faces of loyal supporters, business partners, and new allies filled the crowd. The last few months had been a time of rebuilding, of rising from the ashes of public shame to stand tall once again. Tonight, they were here to announce something that would change not only their future, but the future of countless others. For months, the media had speculated about the Sinclairs' next move. Would they disappear? Would they return to their
old ways? The public was hungry for the next chapter, but no one could have predicted the vision the Sinclairs were about to unveil. Emily took the microphone, her voice steady and calm, yet filled with emotion.
She looked out over the crowd, a deep sense of gratitude in her eyes. Good evening, everyone. I stand before you today not just as a businesswoman or a mother, but as someone who has walked through the storm and come out stronger on the other side. The last few months have been a trial for my family, but in the end, we've learned one important lesson: that adversity doesn't define us, our response to it does. The audience, once skeptical, now listened intently, their eyes fixed
on her. Emily's words carried the weight of experience, of survival.
She had seen her family's reputation shattered, her business empire at risk of collapse, and yet here she was, standing in front of them, stronger and more determined than ever before. When everything fell apart, Emily continued, her voice thick with emotion, I didn't just lose my reputation, I lost trust. I lost the people who mattered most to me, the ones I love. But I've learned that the most important thing in life is not how hard you fall, but how you rise again.
And it is that lesson that has brought us here today. She paused, allowing her words to settle in the room. The silence was powerful, the crowd hanging on every syllable. And so, Emily said with a quiet smile, today I am proud to announce
a new chapter for our family, a new business venture, one that isn't just about profit or success, but about giving back. We are launching a foundation, the Sinclair Resilience Foundation, a place where we can help others who have been torn down by personal struggles, public shame, or the weight of the world. We will be here for those who have fallen, offering them a chance to rebuild and rise again, just as we have. The room erupted into applause. For the first time, the Sinclairs were not being defined by their scandal, but by their willingness to help others. Their story of overcoming adversity, of facing the worst and emerging stronger, was now an inspiration. The crowd, once skeptical, now saw the family in a new light, one of strength, compassion, and resilience. Emily's eyes glistened with emotion as she spoke. We know firsthand the pain of being judged, of being torn down when you're at your lowest. But we also know the power of second chances, and we want to share that with the world. This foundation will be dedicated to helping individuals and families rebuild, whether that means offering financial support, mental health services, or simply a place where people can find strength in one another. Our story is one of triumph, but it's also a story of hope, of new beginnings. As Emily finished her speech, she turned to her family, her children standing proudly beside her. James, Chloe, and Lucas each had their own stories to tell, but now their voices were united in a mission far greater than any of them had ever imagined. The crowd, inspired by their strength, stood in ovation, cheering not just for the Sinclairs' victory, but for their courage in sharing it with the world. The media buzzed with excitement. Headlines that had once been filled with scandal now shifted to reflect the family's new purpose. Sinclair family turns tragedy into triumph, one headline read. The Sinclair Resilience Foundation, a new beginning for the Sinclairs. The world had watched them fall, but now they were watching them rise. And it was a sight to behold. Sponsors who had once backed away in fear of being associated with the family now returned with open arms. Their new initiative was something the public could rally behind, something that aligned with their values, their redemption. It wasn't just about rebuilding their brand, it was about rebuilding their reputation as a family that cared for others, a family that stood for something bigger than themselves. As the evening came to a close, Emily stood on the balcony, looking out over the city. The world was beginning to see her family, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a symbol of strength and redemption. Their legacy would no longer be defined by the scandal they had endured, but by the good they had done in the world. "We've come full circle," Emily said, her voice soft as she spoke to James, Chloe, and Lucas, who stood beside her. "We lost so much, but what we've gained is something far more valuable. We've found each other again, and we've found our purpose." Together, they watched as the city lights flickered below them, a symbol of the bright future ahead. The Sinclair family had not just survived the storm, they had emerged from it stronger, more united, and ready to take on whatever the world had to offer. A new chapter had begun, and this time it was their story of healing, redemption, and hope. That would inspire millions. The Sinclair family had weathered the storm. After months of scandal, betrayal, and public humiliation, they had clawed their way back to the top. Their foundation was gaining traction, their brand was being rebuilt, and their reputation, once shattered, was slowly being restored. For the first time in what felt like forever, they were in control of their own narrative. The media had turned in their favor, and their supporters rallied around them, eager to see them succeed. The future seemed brighter, full of hope and possibility. But just as the Sinclair family began to breathe again, the calm before the storm was shattered by an unexpected turn of events. It started with a single, cryptic message. Emily Sinclair was sitting at her desk in her private office, reviewing the day's reports, when the notification pinged on her phone. The message came from an unknown number, its contents simple yet chilling. "You think it's
Over, Emily. But it's not. The truth hasn't been fully revealed. The game has just begun." Her breath caught in her throat, and the smile she had been wearing moments before faltered. She stared at the message, her pulse quickening. Who could this be? A new enemy? An ally turned against her?
The words hung in the air like a lingering threat. She immediately called her lawyer, her voice steady but urgent. "I need a full security detail at the estate, and I want you to trace this message, find out who sent it." She hung up without waiting. For a response, her mind already racing. The family had just fought their way out of one battle. Now it seemed that a new one was already looming on the horizon. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a news alert. Sinclair family's rise from the ashes raises new questions. Could there be more to their story? Emily's stomach churned. The press had always been quick to jump to conclusions, but now the questions were resurfacing. Were there still secrets buried in the past? Was there something even more damaging hiding beneath the surface? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. James stepped into the room, his face tight with concern. "Mom, we've been getting strange messages, online and from some of our business contacts. They're asking questions we don't have answers to." "What kind of questions?" Emily asked, her voice calm, though she could feel the old tension creeping back. about the merger, about the financials. There are whispers that we've left something out of the story, that we haven't told the full truth. James paused, his expression darkening. And I think it's coming from someone inside, someone who knows more than they should. Emily's mind raced. The enemies she had fought, Simon Daniels, the media, had been dealt with, at least for now. But if someone from within was threatening to expose them, they would be back at square one. Worse, they'd be exposed again, this time with no way to control the damage. She stood up, her face hardening with determination. We need to find out who's behind this, and fast. Just as she finished speaking, Chloe entered the room. Her expression mirrored the same concern that was now creeping into Emily's chest. Mum, I've been going through the old files, the ones from before everything went public. There's something I don't understand. Some of the financials don't add up, transactions that don't fit with the rest of the records. It's like someone's been hiding something from us. Emily's heart skipped a beat. This was exactly what she had feared. There were pieces of their past that still hadn't been uncovered, pieces that, if exposed, could bring them right back into the storm. The room fell silent as Emily processed everything. Her children, once so full of doubt, now looked to her for answers. She was the one who had always led them, and now it was up to her to find a way forward.
I'll handle this, Emily said, her voice unwavering. We've faced the worst of it and we've come out stronger, but we're not done yet. Whoever's behind this will not get the better of us. As the family gathered together, a sense of
determination filled the air. The road ahead would be difficult, and the shadows of the past still loomed over them. But Emily knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. They had already survived the impossible. They could do it again. The room grew quiet as Emily stared out the window, the horizon stretching endlessly before her. She knew the battle was far from over. There were secrets yet to be uncovered and challenges yet to be faced. The door was still open, and beyond it, a new challenge awaited. The final chapter of the Sinclair's story had not yet been written. And as Emily stood there, the weight of what was to come settled on her shoulders, one last test of everything she and her family had fought for.